We're going to go into how you can turn your slow twitch muscle fiber into fast twitch muscle, proven by science. And we're going to start right now. Okay, so one of the big factors around training athletes to make it to the Olympics, to go to the NFL, is that we've got to look at different athletes, okay, that come in here at Garage Strength and figure out where are their muscle fibers, where's their twitch type, are they slow twitch, are they fast twitch, and then over a long period of time, we want to build them out to get to the point so that they're twitchy enough to make it to the Olympics, to become an NCAA All-American. We've done that here with dozens of different athletes at Garage Strength. And in this video, what we're going to be doing is we're going to break down first, what is muscle memory and even genetics? How does genetics get set and how is it determined from a broad perspective? Okay, looking at one specific paper. Then we're going to look at another paper where we're going to analyze explosive fast twitch fibers versus slow twitch fibers, and then how that individual actually fiber shifted throughout their training career. And we're going to talk about exactly what they did. Okay, so when we talk about exactly what they did, you're going to get this deliverable now that you're going to be able to say, okay, if I'm a slower twitch individual, I can become more fast twitch. And you're going to be able to take that and look at the training and take that and apply it to your own scenario. So that's the big goal for today. And I want to look at two specific studies, research papers that I want to analyze and break down to try and pitch this to you, that it is possible to fiber shift. It is possible to override and delete your genetics. Now, one thing that I like to think about when I was training with Dr. Anatoly Bondarchuk, the Soviet coach that I trained with, who was an Olympic champion, he would often talk about genetics and how genetics would get passed down, but how he would also say that it's very easy to a point to get rid of genetics, because most people, not get rid of them entirely, but actually override them to a point, because most people tend to fall within like a decent spectrum of explosive fast twitch fibers. So one of the things that made me think about this, and I'm not going to go too far down the rabbit hole here, is like actually Carl Jung even talks about this from a psychological perspective, that genetics can be passed down, and even memory can be passed down from generation to generation. Experiences and trauma can actually be passed down psychologically. And what we see also is that physiologically, we will have generations of groups of people, okay, that adapt to their geographic surroundings. Okay, and this is how genetics physiologically will get passed down. Is that, let's say you grow up in a specific scenario, a specific situation. You live in the mountains. You have plentiful access to high calories, so you're drinking tons of milk. Let's say you're eating tons of fruits and vegetables. You've got access to tons of meat. And so typically what we've seen genetically is that people who live in these type of situations will actually grow to be bigger, because genetically they have adapted over time that their body and their surroundings can handle those genetics to light up. Okay, now if you grow up in an area and you're more malnourished, and typically if you even live on an island, you will actually be a smaller human being. Like, this is real genetics, and you will actually, there's actually evidence of this even with elephants. It's pretty interesting when you look at them growing up or living on smaller islands. They might be a little bit smaller, but if you have more access to food, you tend to be bigger. Genetically, over time, that's how things get established. And where I want to go with this is, I first want to talk about muscle memory. And the reason why I want to talk about muscle memory is that it's going to link into the second paper around slow twitch athletes that become faster twitch. Okay, and so I wanted to just get into this. This just came out in April of 2025. So this is brand new. Human skeletal muscle possesses both reversible and proteomic signatures in a retained proteomic memory after repeated resistance training. And so what ends up happening, and we'll get into just the abstract on this one, is that when these researchers are looking at it, they basically took athletes, okay, and individuals, and they put them through training, resistance-based training, and they were analyzing how they were adapting to the resistance-based training. And so they looked at things like, okay, what type of response is happening from resistance-based training. Their aim was to examine the skeletal muscle response to 10 weeks of resistance-based training, followed by 10 weeks of training cessation. Okay, and this is going to play into a much larger perspective in the next paper. Okay, so essentially they train for 10 weeks and then they take 10 weeks off. And then after 10 weeks of retraining, so this is a 30-week timeline, they're going 10 weeks of training, 10 weeks off, and then they go 10 weeks back into training. Okay, that's how they're going to look at this. Now, they took 30 healthy, untrained participants, and they put them through this 10-week no training control period, followed by 20 weeks of resistance training. So they altered some of the actual resistance training periods. And when resistance training included twice weekly supervised whole body resistance training sessions, so just twice a week, not even crazy intense, just twice a week, full body. Okay, so they're not even doing like super dialed in sports specific work. They're not even training 5 days a week. They're just doing twice a week. They looked at the vastus lateralis biopsies. They were obtained every 10 weeks. They analyzed using a specific method, and the first resistance training period altered 150 proteins. Okay, so energy metabolism, protein processing, all of these things were compared, okay, from the resistance-based training. And so when they go through this, they make these comparisons after the second resistance-based training period, where they demonstrated reproducibility and proteome adaptations to resistance-based training. So many of the proteins induced by resistance training were reversed towards baseline after detraining. So if you had somebody who is, let's say, genetically more slow twitch, they do resistance-based training, they make these adaptations during resistance-based training, and then they sort of go back to square one when they do that. Okay, so that's the first aspect. They reverse back towards baseline after detraining. But then they're increased again after retraining. So when they started training again, it increases back to the retraining point. Okay, and so the reversible proteins were especially involved in aerobic energy metabolism. Interestingly, several proteins which increase after resistance training remain elevated after detraining. This is the big one. Several proteins which increased after resistance training remained elevated after detraining, okay? And these are proteins involved in muscular contraction. So if you have a protein that gets stimulated, okay, from resistance-based training, and you take, let's say, 10 weeks off, that will actually stay higher, and it's retained, and it does have an impact on contraction and contraction speed. Okay, so that's and even calcium binding. That's very important. So among the latter, calcium activated protease calpain 2 has been recently identified as an epigenetic muscle memory gene. Okay, so if this is elevated, what we see is that there's a detraining, this stays elevated, but then you sort of work back. You might lose muscular hypertrophy during the detraining period, but the protein stays high, so that if you start to train again, it lights up, and there is indeed some sense of muscle memory. Now, we're looking at this, and they're saying, okay, even from a biological perspective or a physiological perspective now, we're seeing the proteins are remaining elevated. We show that resistance training evokes retained protein levels even after 2.5 months of no training. This is a potential proteomic memory of resistance training induced muscular growth in human skeletal muscle. So even off of that, right, one of the big factors here is that they even see that there is some type of neurological adaptation as well. So when these individuals, they get trained, they make these increases, they have some protein occurrences that now keeps that protein levels higher. So even when there is a lack of hypertrophy, when they lose the hypertrophy, they still have some of the neurological innervation remains, and some of it's remaining because of these specific proteins. That increases muscle contractions. And then in turn, when they start to train again, they make those gains faster. This might be something that you see happens when you break an arm. I actually remember when I broke my arm, I was immobilized for 3 months, and this arm was just tiny. But as I got out of my cast, my left arm strength caught up very quickly to my right arm strength. Okay, so and you see this pretty regularly, that it does indeed happen. It's like riding a bike. These things do happen. Okay, now what does that have to do with fiber shifting? Okay, And what I wanted to do was tie this into the analysis of two specific individuals. And it's funny because I've always had this thought, well, the sample size is not big enough in a specific study. And we went over this in the Bench Everyday research paper recently. But what I'm starting to see is that I actually like the smaller populations, because I think so much of research is like done in this sort of vacuum that it really becomes hard to apply it. Whereas when they have only 2-3 samples of people that they're pulling from, like let's say 2 or 3 actual individuals, it actually makes it a little easier to look at the application point, because you have a better understanding of what those 1 to 3 people are actually doing that has this impact. So in this paper, what they ended up doing is there was a Swiss shot putter. And so I'm a track and field coach. I've coached at the Olympics now twice. I've coached shot putters. I coach discus throwers. I also coach football players. I've coached athletes to make it to the NFL. That's how we build our training, is around explosive-based training, around speed-based work, around strength-based work, some endurance work with our wrestlers as well. So this is the wheelhouse of where I live, right? And that's actually one thing that a lot of the training from this individual had a big impact on me at an early age. And a lot of the training inside of our own strength training app, Peak Strength, which is the first link down below in the description, a lot of the training is based off of this style of work. So we do a lot of weightlifting movements, we do a lot of squats, we do a lot of benches, a lot of pull-ups, we do a lot of plyometric work. If you guys are interested in joining our strength training app, Peak Strength, it's the first link in the description. You can head over to peakstrength.app. You can go to the Apple iOS store, the Google Play Store, download Peak Strength, and you can get in and you can start training actually similar to what this dude used to do. So when they took the muscle biopsies, again, they were looking at the vastus lateralis of 2 world-class shot putters, shot putter 1 and 2. So let's just remember that. We have to understand we're looking at shot putter 1 and shot putter 2. Now, I also have a special place in this paper because one of my online athletes actually trains at where this dude used to train in Switzerland. He's now going to the World University Games as a shot putter. They took shot putter 1, shot putter 2, and then they took the untrained brother of shot putter 1. Okay, so shot putter 2 had a predominance of type 2 fibers. So shot putter 2 had nearly 70% fast twitch, okay? 67%. So nearly 70%. That's pretty freaking good if you want to be an explosive athlete. And when you're looking at a sport like shot putting, you have 7 feet to generate as much force as possible, so as quickly as possible. Your impulse output has to be extremely high. So you have to generate a lot of force in a short period of time. So having fast twitch fibers is key for a shot putter, similar to a D end or a D tackle or, a rugby, a bigger field rugby like a hooker. Okay. So think about that. Shot putter 2, they had a lot of type 2. They had distinct hypertrophy of type 1 as well as type 2 fibers. And in shot putter 1, type 2 fibers only amounted to 40%. So we'll have athletes come in and we'll test them on a vertical jump, on a broad jump. We'll do these tests, right? And we'll look at like, how explosive is this athlete? Let's say the first day they come in, they have a 24-inch vertical, maybe a 26, 27-inch vertical. Typically when you see that, you're dealing with an athlete that's athletic, they're decent, but they're not a barn burner, right? They're not going to be this crazy super freak. You're going to have to take time to develop them. It's going to take you, 5-10 years to really get them to the point where they can become an NCAA All-American. Like, genuinely, that's what we like to think about. You get a kid who's 13, 14, they got a 24-inch vertical. They're not super freaks, but if we show up 4 or 5 days a week, they're going to be okay. Now, in shot putter 1, type 2 fibers amount to only 40% due to their selective hypertrophy. However, type 2 fibers accounted for 67% of the total cross-sectional area. So the type 1 fibers in shot putter 1 were similar in size to his untrained brother. So we're looking at this and we're saying shot putter 1 and his brother equals pretty slow twitch, right? Slow twitch. Okay, so we have to think through that. Fairly slow twitch. Genetically speaking, we can go back and we can think through this. Like, they're going to be pretty slow twitch. Now, shot putter 1 starts to train. The untrained brother doesn't. He's untrained. After 3 years of active detraining, okay, type 2 fibers of shot putter 1 had reduced in size to values closer to those of his brother. Okay, so they go through and they're analyzing some things like basically the beginning of their training, what happens when they're actually full-blown training. They compare it to the untrained brother, and then when shot putter 1 stops training, they come back 3 years later and they analyze the muscle fibers. So we can see what happens throughout this timeline, the continuum of their career. So explosive strength, this is what they're trying to look at. They're trying to analyze explosive strength because this is a major characteristic of a champion shot putter. And the best part about this paper is the dude that they're analyzing, an Olympic bronze medalist. He was, I believe, a 3-time world champion. I think he won in 87, 89, and 91, if I remember correctly. So he's a shot putter from Switzerland that would be expected to have large muscle cross-sectional area and an increased proportion of fast type 2 fibers. Okay, found 60, so Costil, so they're even citing that another paper found that 63% of fast twitch, or 63% of muscle from elite shot putters typically is fast twitch. If you remember back in the beginning, this dude started at 40%. So he's behind the 8 ball by 23%. Actually, it's like, technically, wouldn't that be like 50%? Behind the 8 ball with the amount of fast twitch fibers. So think about that. At the same time, it was noted that these explosive athletes had muscle fibers approximately twice the cross-sectional area seen in untrained individuals. So they were big, they have good hypertrophy. And this is one big thing we have to think about with shot putters is like the bigger they get, the more force they put out. Hypertrophy leads to more force. We know this, okay? Similar values for both fiber type distribution and fiber size have also been reported for weightlifters. It's generally assumed that the fiber hypertrophy in these athletes is a consequence of training. So in this, it's a consequence of training. Now, we also know there is some genetic predisposition specifically to someone's fiber type. Okay, we can see that. We see that just like memories when I was talking about the Young book. Memories, we know that muscle fiber and muscle fiber type can get passed on from generation to generation. So they took the opportunity to analyze muscle tissue from this world champion. His name's Werner Gunther. Okay, we've analyzed his training in the past. The biopsies were obtained. The shot putter stopped competing. This was just after he won the last world title. Actually, he might have won the world title. Yeah, he won the world title in 93, so I was wrong. I think it was 87. Was it 87, 91, 93, something like that? Those were the years that he won. So he won in 93, and then he retires. So the biopsy was taken during that time, and then 3 years after he was done competing. Okay? And then as a comparison, they used another training companion that was also in these videos from back in the day. He's a 21-meter shot putter, very solid shot putter, and they compared them. And they compared this to the brother, okay, the brother of Werner Gunther. So the contraction speed of a muscle fiber is determined by the isoform pattern of the contractile proteins. This goes back to the first paper of the elevated proteins, okay? If you have elevated proteins, specific protein types, you'll see faster contractile rates, right? So they're looking at this and they're going, the prime determinant of contraction speed is a myosin heavy chain isoform. They're going through everything, and then success in shot put with the classic technique. It was used for both shot putters, meaning they were doing the glide. They weren't spinning, they were gliding. Now they can start to break down how well they could use these fibers to recruit, right? So when they're going through the process, they're pulling out the muscle fibers. They're analyzing this. So it depends on the ability to generate a perfectly timed, very high force that maximally accelerates the shot. Very high power output for which type 2 fibers are better suited than type 1. Type 2 fibers are better suited for high force output. But remember back to the beginning when they took the biopsy of Werner Gunther, they said, he only has 40% fast twitch fibers, just like his brother. How did he get so freaking explosive? And they hadn't really started to look at what his fiber type was when he was training. So they performed the biopsy in the majority of human studies. It's safe. They go through with needles. I'm sure they might have been used to the needles. We also hypothesized that this type of training would also lead to shifts in proportions of isoforms, myofibrillar proteins. This is the biopsies and the histochemistry. This is how they're staining it, how they're saving it, how they're analyzing it. These are the methods they're going through. They're probing everything. They're looking at the cross-section from biopsy of shot putter 2, the staining of the muscle fibers from the vastus lateralis from the 2 shot putters, right? Cross-section from biopsy of shot putter 1 is A. That's the shot put world champion. This is right here is the cross-section of Werner Gunther's muscle, okay? He was a world champion, Olympic bronze medalist, known as one of the freakiest athletes. Okay, he did a lot of plyometrics. He did a lot of weightlifting movements like power cleans, like power snatches, behind the neck jerks, a lot of isometric holds. He did a lot of squats, right? He's an absolute freak. His coach ended up coaching Valerie Adams, one of the greatest shot putters in the history of the world, probably arguably the best female shot putter currently. She retired up to this point. The former shot put world champion taken in the fully trained state at the end of his career. So this is his cross-section at the end of his career right here. Now, B is the cross-section biopsy of shot putter 2 right here, okay? This is his training partner, a 21-meter shot putter. So right now here at Garage Strength, I want to say we have 3 or 4 21-meter shot putters in our training stable. So these guys are explosive. We've got guys that have jerked, 500-plus pounds, back squatted 600-plus pounds, 30-plus inch verticals weighing 270, very explosive. The world champion's training companion. Note the larger areas of type 2 and smaller areas of type 1 fibers in shot putter 1. Okay, so the larger areas of type 2 and smaller areas of type 1, okay, compared to shot putter 2. Okay, so let's go here. The section of shot putter 2's biopsies contain 3 type 2C fibers. So these are 3 type 2C. You can see some of the notes in here. The section of, fibers intermediate between type 1 and 2. The proportion was 1% or less in all biopsies. Now, what are the results here? And this is where I think a lot of people will make these excuses. Like, I got a 25-inch vertical jump. I can't do anything about it. And I think that's a commonplace of what we'll see. And then I think that there's a lot of, to quote Tim Riley, I think that there's a lot of movement cults out there that will tell you shouldn't lift heavy, or you shouldn't lift fast, or you shouldn't do weightlifting movements, or even have your feet in specific positions, because these people were not athletic and they were always feeling bad about themselves when they would do heavier lifts, and they never developed as athletes because they never stayed true to their training long enough to actually develop. So then they get some freak to come into their program and they con this good athlete, and then they develop a movement cult like Goda or Seidman's training, instead of just recognizing that it might take you 10 years to get to the top, and it's possible for you to fiber shift, and it's okay for you to do these things. And in fact, it's actually necessary if you want to be the best. I just wanted to throw that out there. So in the fiber type distributions, the biopsies taken in their fully trained state at the end of their career, distinct muscle fiber hypertrophy was noted when the fiber areas were compared with those from untrained individuals, such as the brother of Werner Gunther. So while in the biopsy from shot putter 2, both fiber types were hypertrophied, there was a selective hypertrophy of only the type 2 fibers in the biopsy from shot putter 1. Type 2 fibers had more hypertrophy in Werner Gunther, probably because he was more slow twitch dominant when he started. So he had more hypertrophy in type 2 based off his training. Now, what we're seeing here, as we get through this, we're going to get into his training. We're going to talk through his training. In the shot putter 2 biopsy, the type 2 fibers had a cross-sectional area 1.4-fold larger than type 1 fibers. This is comparable with the type 2-to-1 ratio reported in powerlifters. In the biopsy of shot putter 1, Werner Gunther, however, this difference was almost threefold. Considering only the percentage of type 2 or type 1 and type 2 fibers, the biopsy from shot putter 2 revealed a predominance of type 2 fibers, whereas shot putter 1 had a majority of type 1 fibers. So Werner Gunther has a majority of slow twitch fibers. Majority slow twitch. Just remember that. This dude was a 73 footer. I think he threw 2245 something, 2250. Okay, just think about that. However, due to the large size difference between type 1 and type 2 fibers, the relative type 2 fiber area for shot putter 1, Gunther, was in, not Gunther the pro wrestler, but Werner Gunther, was in the range of shot putter 2 in the biopsies taken at the end of the career, showing that in shot putter 1, the biopsy taken, this basically shows that at the end of the career, the type 2 fibers in Werner Gunther hypertrophied and now created a larger percentage, okay? Now, here's where the kicker comes in. In Werner Gunther's biopsy taken 3 years later, no training, the type 2 fibers had lost 25% of their cross-sectional area. Now remember, we covered the first study where they showed after 10 weeks of detraining, what happens. Okay, they basically go back to baseline. Now, they go back to baseline. So if you're somebody who is type 1 as an athlete and you fiber shift to type 2 based off your training over a long period of time, then you get injured, you might go back to baseline. But remember, you'll have the global innervation will remain, and the protein levels will remain high, so that when you start training, muscle memory will occur and you'll fiber shift back if you're in an explosive strength training sport. So fiber type distribution and fiber size at the time were comparable to the values obtained from the brother of Werner Gunther. So we can see here, there is a fiber shifting happening that goes back to his genetic predisposition. Now imagine if Werner Gunther went in and he got these fiber type tests and they were like, well, you're only 40% instead of the 63 to 70% that we see in these other fast twitch athletes. Maybe you shouldn't be a shot putter and you should just stop training and give up and go do Joel Seaman style training or go to training. Okay, just put that in your mind. He would have never won world titles. He would have never been an Olympic bronze medalist. Think about that. That's the big factor. Okay, now all of this stuff, expression of myosin alkali light chain in the muscles of these two fibers, of these two shot putters. You can see all through here the muscle fibers here, okay? And it's interesting when you're looking at this. So from another biopsy taken after 3 years of detraining, E and F right here are from shot putter 2 taken in a fully trained state at the end of the year, okay? Or at the end of his career. So I want to get into the discussion part of this because it makes it really fun, and then we're going to look at a specific chart, and then we're going to talk about his training. So the biopsies taken at the end of both shot putters' career when they were at a fully trained competitive state showed distinct hypertrophy of muscle fibers when compared to the untrained subjects, such as the brother of Werner Gunther. For males in the range of 80 kilos, so think 176 pounds, and heights between 1.75 and 1.8 meters, areas between, have been reported for type 1 and between for type 2. The large differences between studies can be explained by methodological factors, the difficulty in selecting really horizontally cut fibers, and the handling of the biopsy when taken out with a needle. Okay, so we'll go through this. The only study with a larger number of subjects, 95, showed average fiber areas of type 2 around here. When compared to these values, both fiber types in the biopsy of shot putter 2 were clearly hypertrophied, both fiber types. Whereas in the biopsy of world champion shot putter 1, there was a selective hypertrophy of type 2 only. So that's interesting because the shot putter 2, the 21 meter guy, had fiber hypertrophy in type 1 and type 2. Werner Gunther somehow, maybe it is a genetic thing, is that because his body was so slow twitch, they were focusing on such strength gains and explosive strength as determined that his body almost just focused on hypertrophying the fast twitch fibers because it recognized it was lacking and lagging in those qualities. So this is interesting. And then compared with the above untrained fiber areas of his type 1 brother. Okay, a weakness in these comparisons is the fact that all of our 3 subjects were tall and distinctively heavier than the untrained subjects in the other studies. So, basically in the trained state, these guys weighed close to 300 pounds, and then they weighed about 250 in the untrained state. The brother of Werner Gunther was about 215, and a bigger individual. So that these people are genetically larger. The interesting part is that I've always sort of felt most genetically larger individuals, I believe, will typically have more fast twitch. Okay, now, here's what we got to look at. This chart right here, this is the big one, okay? When you're looking at the chart, you can see things quite clearly. So this is Werner Gunther at the end of his career. This is one of the most explosive freaks that you'll ever see. At the end of his career, he had 60% slow twitch, 40% fast twitch. Crazy. That's just crazy, right? And now shot putter 1, after 3 years of detraining, gained more slow twitch here, lost more fast twitch here. Now the brother was almost identical to after the 3 years of detraining. Okay, so that's pretty freaking interesting there. Now we see too, these numbers are eerily similar. The type 2 after detraining with the brother, so the genetics there are pretty strong. Now the shot putter 2 at the end of his career, 33% was slow twitch, almost 70% was fast twitch on the shot putter 2, the 21 meter guy. So you can see here the area occupied by the type 2 fibers though, and you see here is closer to almost 70% in Gunther, right? Versus this point. So we know that the type 2 fibers have greater hypertrophy right here. Okay. And then we see after the detraining a massive decrease of 20%. Okay. So literally a 30% drop off right here. And it becomes closer to his brother. Now he still maintains, based off that muscle memory study, we see he maintains this. Okay. At the end of their career, we see the area occupied right here. So that's a very interesting analysis. So when we're going through, and I want to get into the more of this discussion, is that fiber areas from the shot putters and discus throwers with body weight similar are usually fast twitch. 60+% of the muscle fibers in a body of an elite discus thrower shot putter will be fast twitch. There's going to be marked hypertrophy, mainly focused on the type 2 fibers. Remember, we explained that, we talked about that, where it's like the fiber hypertrophy was almost entirely in the fast twitch fibers for Werner Gunther because his body was more slow twitch. So at least that's me jumping to conclusions. So both biopsies from the shot putters in their trained state showed the expected structural characteristics associated with explosive strength. We take this and we're training these individuals. We're focusing on explosive strength. We're building this out over time, and we will in turn see better hypertrophy from the type 2 fibers to lead to that explosiveness and to basically push away the type 1 slow twitch. Now, here's the big factor, is that Werner Gunther lost 25% fiber volume during detraining, and that this would suggest that selective hypertrophy of type 2 fibers was due to the 15 years of intensive strength training. The number one takeaway of deleting your bad genetics is that it could take you 15 years of selective hypertrophy work and intensive strength training to stop being slow twitch. So you get a kid who's 13, 14 years old and you tell him, look, for the next 5 to 10 years, I need you to commit to intensive training so that we can make you as explosive as possible. And we can take you from being less fast twitch to being more fast twitch, but it's going to take time. And we've got to squat, and we've got to jump, and we've got to sprint, and we've got to do big Olympic lifts. You look at the Werner Gunther training. Okay, this is the number one takeaway. This right here. This is the number one takeaway for the entire video. Controlled strength training studies over periods of several months have shown increases in fiber areas of vastus lateralis. If we suggest that mainly focusing on intensive work that leads to high rate of force production, this is going to, over a long period of time, improve your fiber typing, okay, so that you can fiber shift. I think this is like genuinely the most important takeaway. In conclusion, selective training induced hypertrophy of type 2 fibers as well as an increased expression of fast MLC isoform that you saw in Werner Gunther. So if we're looking at his systematic strength training normally leads to hypertrophy of type 1 as well as type 2. We found here with Gunther, it was mainly just the type 2 hypertrophy that happened, likely because he was so slow twitch. Okay, so if he's so slow twitch, if you have somebody who is slower twitch and they compared him to his brother, very similar in the detrained period, when you have someone like that, we can look at breaking down Werner Gunther's training cycles. Okay, he would spend a large portion of time under tension, trying to increase his bench press, trying to increase his back squat, trying to increase his cleans, trying to increase his behind the neck jerks. He would do a lot of this style of training. So much, I actually trained like him my senior year of high school, going into my freshman year of college, because I found his training online back in 2002. It was on gashead.org. And you look at this and you say, okay, then we're doing, you see the classic videos of him doing the bounds up the steps. You see the single leg bounds. You see him doing balance beam work. He had to do a lot of work to delete the bad genetics. So if you're someone in this case, you have to recognize you are 100% capable of becoming more explosive. You are 100% capable of becoming stronger. You just need to spend 4 days a week minimum for 5 to 10 years. And you can't, like, one of the biggest errors that I see with athletes that come in that tend to be slower twitch is they don't give themselves the chance. They don't give themselves the time. They don't give themselves that space, the work ethic to say, I'm going to spend the next year, 2 years, 3 years to have my body fully express itself and to have greater hypertrophy in the type 2 fibers, because that's what it's going to take. And you've got to look at how you break down that week, and you got to focus on, okay, day 1, we're going to do some heavy lifts. Day 2, we're going to do some heavy upper body lifts. Day 3, now we got to do the twitchy work. We got to think about Gunther doing the stair jumps and the single leg bounds and the hurdles out on the track on the Mediterranean. Like, we got to think about that stuff. That's where in our strength training at peak strength, day 3 is typically going to be athlete day or impulse day. Impulse day is another full body type session where we're focusing on moving weights fast. It's got to be heavy at some times. It's got to be fast at other times. You got to do a lot of plyometrics, and you got to do it repetitively over long periods of time if you want to fiber shift. So the big thing here, I wanted to present the muscle memory part, because you could still see that after the 3-year detraining period, Gunther did go back to being closer genetically, more like his brother. Now, the argument could still be, if he wanted to come back into training, it might take him a year to get back to full speed, but it could happen. And this is something Thea Lafon just won the Olympics in the triple jump. She took off for about 3.5, 4 months because she had a stress fracture in her leg. She's almost back to form now because she's able to get back into that training because of the muscle memory. So there's 2 factors here. You can fiber shift. You'll keep the fiber shifting after a detraining period. You can ignite it again. Just recognize it takes time. Okay, so once you recognize it takes time, okay, and you have a bigger buy-in, that's when you develop into a champion. If you want more content like this, here's a video from Werner Gunther's training. You can train just like him by clicking on the link down below in the description. You can head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store, or the Apple iOS Store. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.